My envious mother commandeered my wedding with an egocentric tirade detailing how my very existence had wrecked her life, compelling me to unveil the hidden truths about her. For context, our bond had always been fraught with distance. She separated from my father when I was roughly 11, and custody was unevenly split between us. I was meant to dwell with my mother every other month, yet I rarely lingered there beyond 3 or 4 months, invariably spending the lion's share of my time under my father's roof, since evidently my mother was perpetually too occupied with trivialities to truly care for me. I never quite grasped the nature of her ceaseless busyness. After all, she wasn't climbing any corporate ladder, she was merely a real estate agent, and not one of the industry's elite. Soon enough, a persistent, gnawing suspicion took root that she simply had no genuine desire to share her time with me, constantly concocting feeble excuses to keep me at bay. Long before the divorce, our closeness was never more than a fragile thread. I had always heard that daughters should be their mother's confidant, yet my mother appeared content amidst a bustling circle of friends while I desperately craved her undivided affection. Sadly, as the years passed, time only deepened the ever-widening gulf between us. Occasionally, she would drop by my father's house and invite me to her own dwelling, but once I reached 13, the age where awareness of our estrangement began to crystallize, I found that every sojourn to her sterile, unfriendly abode only deepened my aching longing for the true solace of home. Nothing about that cold, impersonal space, not even my mother's fleeting, insincere smile or gentle reassurances, ever evoked the comforting embrace of belonging that I so desperately craved. Matters worsened dramatically when she began dating, parading her new suitors through our door. In my late teens, an unsettling sensation crept in, as if she secretly harbored envy, treating me as nothing more than a bitter rival. She incessantly belittled me and mocked me without provocation, a behavior that not only left me simmering with discomfort and fury but also cast an awkward pall over her dates. After all, who in their right mind would demean their own daughter in an attempt to charm a stranger? Once, I finally confronted her directly about this behavior, and she casually brushed it off as mere banter, insisting there was simply no reason for me to take it so seriously or to endlessly play the perpetual victim. So, instead of erupting in uncontrollable anger, I opted to mirror her biting remarks. Whenever she would pick on me and lob sneering barbs with relish, I'd promptly fire back with equally stinging, cutting, razor-sharp verbal jibes. Our exchanges soon escalated into a miniature verbal brawl, a fierce contest where both of us vied to outdo each other in cruelty. While I found the sparring strangely exhilarating, it invariably unsettled her potential partners, driving them away. Eventually, frustrated by the disruption, she abandoned the game, and I, too, gradually curtailed my visits to her home. It was my father who persistently urged me to maintain some semblance of a relationship with her, and truth be told, without his insistence, I might have never bothered speaking to her at all. There was also that turbulent stretch from the moment I turned 18 until my college graduation, a time when my father struggled through dire financial hardships as his business teetered on the brink, leaving me to grapple with mounting tuition fees. Despite loathing the very idea of burdening her, I eventually mustered the courage to ask my mother if she could spare some help. She apologized profusely, lamenting that she truly wished she could assist, but lamentably, she lacked the funds, since she, too, was on the brink of an engagement, diligently saving for a wedding and an extravagant honeymoon set for just a few months ahead. Back then, I wouldn't have minded her financial constraints. After all, she wasn't obligated to fund my education, but witnessing her own wedding, an absurdly lavish, ostentatious affair complete with glittering decor and extravagant excess, ignited a simmering irritation in me. I felt that she possessed more than enough resources to help cover my tuition, yet she deliberately withheld assistance out of spite. This choice not only rubbed me the wrong way but also struck me as darkly ironic, considering her nuptials likely cost exponentially more than the modest sum I had once requested. My father had been prepared to shoulder nearly all of the expenses, requiring just a modest contribution from her. Yet, that marriage collapsed in less than 2 years, leaving me to wonder what all the commotion was about. Even then, my father advised me to let it go, and I did, not wanting to appear as an ungrateful, entitled brat. Now, approaching 28, I finally celebrated my own wedding just a couple of days past. At the insistence of my father, who firmly believed that having one's family present was indispensable on such a monumental day, I found myself utterly unable to refuse and, with a heavy heart, invited my mother. Reluctantly, I imposed strict conditions on her attendance, yet she assured me, with an air of reluctant acceptance, that she was prepared to attend. I firmly told her that she was required to have her outfit approved by me beforehand, fully aware that if left to her own devices, she would undoubtedly parade in something outrageously inappropriate. Her tone carried a subtle note of disappointment, and I sensed her covert determination to steal the spotlight. Nonetheless, everything began to unravel when I insisted, unequivocally, that her attire receive my prior sanction. She even questioned whether this strict requirement applied to all the guests, and I confirmed that it indeed did, though that wasn't strictly true, as my primary aim was solely to eliminate any chance for her to stir up unwanted drama. She eventually sent over several outfit options, and I reluctantly approved the one that was the least outrageous. I also sternly informed her that I would much prefer she abstain from giving any sort of speech or tribute, a stipulation that visibly offended her sensibilities. Desperate to smooth over the tension, I explained that the sole reason for dodging lengthy speeches was that my father, too, had chosen not to speak, and with numerous children in attendance, we simply aimed to keep the ceremony as concise and heartfelt as possible. Admittedly, that explanation wasn't entirely factual, but by the time she realized the truth, it was too late for any corrective measures. I believed I had neutralized the threat. Despite her attendance, I meticulously planned to leave no openings for her to wreak havoc. Yet, true to her obstinate nature, she managed to orchestrate mischief and, regrettably, succeeded in infuriating me on my wedding day, nullifying all my careful precautions and shattering the day's serenity. In retrospect, I profoundly regret having extended that invitation. On my wedding day, after the heartfelt vows had been exchanged, it was time for speeches. The moment my mother caught sight of my father rising to seize the microphone, she unleashed a withering, disdainful glare in my direction, as if to say I was utterly beneath her. My father's speech flowed with beauty and raw emotion, momentarily banishing my mother's icy stare from my thoughts. But to my utter horror, I then witnessed her rising from her seat and snatching the microphone away from him. I desperately wanted to intervene, yet I held back, unwilling to snatch the microphone and create a scene on my wedding day. As my husband tried to steer everyone to the dance floor, my mother insisted that every guest remain seated so we could savor the short speech she had carefully written for me. Her speech began, and what followed was a masterclass in self-indulgence. She spoke at length about how I had ruined her life merely by being born. She launched into a tirade about the sacrifices she made as a mother and lamented my ingratitude. She wept intermittently, her tears appearing contrived to emphasize her pain, and accused me of lying to dissuade her from speaking at my wedding. She recounted how she had sacrificed a promotion during her pregnancy with me, claiming she did so to avoid stress before delivery, and insisted that she still suffered financially by remaining in a low-paying job. She insisted that the financial setbacks were a daily reminder of her sacrifice, and that every penny she earned was a price paid for her unwavering dedication. I knew her story was false, as my mother had always been well off, leaving me puzzled by her complaints. She continued by bemoaning how I had been a burden to raise, expected constant gratitude from me, and even reminded everyone of the many boyfriends she had forsaken during my turbulent teenage years because they could not tolerate my presence. She argued that her sacrifices were unparalleled and that I had consistently minimized her importance in my life for reasons known only to fate. Finally, she concluded by declaring how selfless and great she had been as a mother, yet lamented that she had failed because her own daughter did not recognize her worth or deem her truthful. She even recalled, with bitter emphasis, how each rejected suitor had proven unworthy of her love, using their failures as evidence of my supposed neglect and ingratitude. It was a dramatically overblown and embellished narrative meant to justify her behavior and cast me as the ungrateful villain. After enduring countless grievances and hurtful betrayals from my mother over the past several years, this particular display was simply intolerable. I rose to my feet, fueled by a determination to expose her true, unvarnished nature to everyone gathered. Every single detail I had alluded to in the earlier segments of this narrative found its voice in my speech, for it was the unvarnished truth, a resolute declaration meant to set the record straight and to ensure that she could no longer continue her deceitful practice of portraying herself as the perpetual victim. I wanted the absolute truth to be known, regardless of any personal cost. My father's jaw dropped when I recounted these painful childhood stories, shattering the long-held pact of secrecy he so fervently maintained. He had always insisted that our family's private matters remain hidden from the world. After all, he claimed, we need not air our dirty linen in public. In truth, I suspect his concern was less about propriety and more about desperately preserving our carefully constructed appearances. My guess is that he valued image over honest family pain. I could sense the discomfort among the guests as I ranted about my mother, while she sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor, occasionally glowering at me in a feeble attempt to silence my words. Unfortunately, the audience was not composed of her dates, and I was no longer a teenager, rendering her intimidation tactics increasingly ineffective. After I finished speaking, tears streamed down my face, and my husband quickly guided me aside with gentle urgency. He ensured that the bar was opened and arranged for food to be served promptly, diverting the guests' attention from the spectacle of my emotional breakdown. He firmly instructed my parents to maintain their distance and escorted me out of the venue to our quiet hotel room, where I could slowly regain my composure. I sobbed uncontrollably, taking several agonizing minutes to steady myself, while he patiently talked me through the raw anguish, offering soothing words and unwavering comfort every step of the way. I finally felt the weight lift from my chest and declared I was ready to return. There was simply no way I would forego my own wedding because of my mother's misdeeds. I had always sensed that her envy simmered beneath the surface, and now that venom was unleashed in its rawest form. My husband, calm but resolute, urged me to wait in the room while he confirmed that my mother had indeed vanished, even asking if I preferred my father's comforting presence to remain. I agreed without hesitation. Despite everything, he was still my father, and I couldn't bear to lose him. Roughly 10 minutes later, he reappeared with the news that the party could resume since my mother was gone. Apparently, she had slipped away immediately after my departure, unwilling to suffer the humiliation of being openly insulted by her own daughter, and my father had even raised his voice enough to eject her. That revelation brought a surge of relief, and as soon as I rejoined the celebration, my father's heartfelt apology and our tight embrace mended a fraction of the day's wounds. The event roared back to life as numerous guests complimented my courage for publicly calling out my mother's rubbish on my wedding day. Even my mother-in-law expressed her admiration, remarking how fortunate her son was to be marrying such a resilient, intelligent woman, and by the end of the day, that unsightly hitch had nearly faded from memory. After retreating to my hotel room, I finally found a moment to check my phone and discovered an unread message from my mother. Out of cautious curiosity, I opened her chat and was startled to find that she had penned an entire speech, even sending a picture of her work. As I read through her words, I couldn't help but notice a surprising tenderness woven through them. She explained that the speech had been written ages ago, on the day I sent her the invitation, though she had nearly discarded it when I declared that no speeches were allowed. Instead, she decided to gift it on my wedding day as an early present. Ironically, her intended wedding gift had been a car, slated to surprise me a week later, yet, after witnessing my father's moving address and even my in-laws sharing their sentiments, she discovered I'd lied to her. Wounded by that betrayal, she unleashed a litany of harsh words. She admitted she was fully aware of our troubled past but had hoped to make amends when she received the invitation, with the written apology meant to heal old scars, a chance lost because of my lies. In her final message, she wished me happiness on this new journey yet declared she never wished to meet or hear from me again, accusing me of breaking her heart over some ancient, petty feud. As I absorbed her bitter missive, I realized that perhaps I'd misstepped by assuming she would sabotage my special day. She claimed that, in the aftermath, no one would speak to her, and she was deeply hurt that I presumed she'd try to ruin my wedding. In the days following, disappointment gnawed at me, and I've kept this secret, unwilling to let anyone believe that I might be at fault, even as I question if I truly am. Was I really the asshole for expecting my mother to ruin my wedding and lying to her to prevent it? Update 1. I'm grateful for all the supportive comments. They forced me to reassess everything about my mother through a new, unflinching lens. Perhaps deceiving her wasn't ideal, but our past tiffs left me no choice. Strangely, she ended up shifting all the blame onto me. If she had desired to apologize so desperately, she could have done so even after discovering my fabricated no-speeches rule. I still wonder why she felt compelled to stage such a public mea culpa when hardly anyone outside a small circle even knew of our strained relationship. After all, my wedding was meant to celebrate my husband and me, not resurrect old battles or serve as her self-aggrandizing platform. I discussed everything with my father and husband, seeking their opinions. When I showed them the photo of her letter, they pointed out that it showed no signs of age, no creases or wear, suggesting it was likely written on the very day she was booted out, designed solely to guilt-trip me. Though part of me hesitates to believe that theory entirely, my mother's past behavior makes it all too plausible. In the end, I've decided not to speak to her again, and I refuse to feel guilty for my choices. Update 2. It had been nearly 8 days since my wedding, and with no word from her, I assumed my mother had moved on. Yet yesterday, on a quiet weekend with my husband at home, she unexpectedly arrived, determined that both of us, and even my father, must hear her news. Confused and reluctant, I nearly barred her entry, but she forcefully wedged herself into our living room and settled on our couch. Then, with theatrical coldness, she announced that she had chosen to donate all her money to charity instead of giving it to me, as originally planned. Casting a hard look at my husband, she declared that because of my awful behavior, he could now kiss any potential inheritance goodbye. She ordered me to inform my father too, blaming him for having kicked her out on my wedding day, and insisted that we were now disinherited. Seizing the moment, I reminded her of the very speech she had delivered earlier, in which she claimed I had ruined her career by forcing her to reject a coveted promotion while expecting me, leaving her stuck in a mediocre job. Caught off guard, she appeared visibly flustered, as if unprepared for being called out on her fabrications. She argued that had I not been born, she would have soared to a higher position at a better company, yet here she was, pinned by me. I laughed and retorted that true success requires hard work and achievement, not endless blame. I noted that she'd had ample time to succeed, especially since it was my father who bore the brunt of raising me. If he could juggle business and parenting, she had no excuse. When she tried to argue back, I shut her down, asserting that I didn't need her money anyway. My husband and I were secure without it. It mattered little if she cut us out of her will. I then politely asked her to leave, but she refused, insisting she wouldn't depart without an apology. Growing increasingly annoyed, I warned that I'd call the police to have her removed if she didn't leave voluntarily. She claimed I was bluffing, but when she saw my phone already dialing, she erupted with curses and stormed out. Despite the chaos, I felt a strange relief at finally confronting her without concern for others' opinions. My husband remained steadfast by my side, and even my father praised the way I handled the ordeal. I truly feel fortunate to have them. Update 3. It's been a week since my mother and I last exchanged words. In that time, she bombarded me with sporadic texts, pleading for an apology by listing every kind deed she claimed to have done for me as a child, a transparent attempt to manipulate my emotions. For every small act of care, however, there were countless wrongs that far outweighed them. I tried to ignore her, muting her notifications, but soon she resorted to texting from another number, forcing me to block her. I had hesitated before because she lives alone. If something were to happen, I wanted to know, but now I see no reason to keep that door open. If, heaven forbid, something happens to her, I can still check in discreetly with her neighbor. I simply can't continue to put my own well-being second to family. It isn't fair to me, and I refuse to do so any longer. Update 4. It's been nearly a month since my last update, and I had hoped this chapter would finally close, but fate intervened. A relative recently informed me that my mother is moving out of state, and she made a huge public display about it on social media. In her post, she mentioned both me and my father by name, declaring that since we, the very family she once cherished, had stopped speaking to her, there was no longer any point in staying, as nothing remained for her here. The post was raw and emotional, yet I chose not to respond or reach out, accepting her sentiment that there was nothing left for me either. I can acknowledge that she made a last-ditch attempt to mend things, but I'm now far beyond forgiveness. I wish her well for her future, yet I sincerely hope I never have to meet her again. Harsh as it may sound, that is the unvarnished truth.